I never thought a simple joke would destroy my marriage, but the moment I said it, I saw his face change. Cold, silent, and then he just walked away. No yelling, no fight, just gone. I thought he'd come back, apologize, beg me to stay, but instead, he handed me something that shattered my entire world. And that's when I realized I made the biggest mistake of my life. I'm Emily, 31, from California, and I always thought I had the perfect life. A devoted husband, a beautiful home, and a career I was passionate about. I met Daniel 5 years ago at a charity event. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but there was something about him. His quiet confidence, the way he really listened when I spoke. He was a financial analyst, practical and level-headed, the kind of man you could build a stable future with. We got married within 2 years, and at first everything was perfect. Daniel was my rock, always supportive of my dreams, especially when I wanted to start my own boutique fitness studio. He believed in my vision, helping me with budgeting, planning, and making sure I didn't take on more than I could handle. And for a while, we were happy, really happy. But marriage isn't just about love. It's about time, attention, and effort, and that's where things started to slip. Daniel's job was demanding and he traveled often. At first, I didn't mind, I was busy too, but as my business grew, so did my stress. And Daniel, the logical problem solver, only saw my struggles through numbers and efficiency. Start small, he'd say. Don't rush into debt. But I wanted more. I wanted excitement, passion, and someone who made me feel alive. Enter Jason. Jason was Daniel's younger brother, charismatic, charming, and completely different from my husband. He worked in event planning, always surrounded by people, always the center of attention. I noticed the way he looked at me at family gatherings, how he'd casually compliment my outfits, how he'd laugh at my jokes even when no one else did. It was harmless at first. But as Daniel spent more time away, Jason was always there. He'd text little jokes, send funny videos, even drop by my studio just to check in. It felt good, being noticed, being appreciated. And the more I compared them, the more I resented my own husband. I didn't mean for things to go too far. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. But in those quiet moments when I was alone, a thought kept creeping into my mind. What if I had married the wrong brother? At first, it was nothing. Just harmless conversations. Just a little extra attention. Jason made me feel special, something I hadn't felt in a long time. With Daniel constantly busy, crunching numbers, setting financial goals, and planning for the future, I started to feel like a checklist item rather than a wife. And Jason, he was effortless. He'd stop by my studio with coffee, casually mentioning how he was just in the area. He'd like every post I made on Instagram, even the ones Daniel ignored. When I vented about my business struggles, he didn't tell me to budget better or think logically. Instead, he'd say things like, "You're too passionate to fail, Em. People see that in you. You're not like Daniel, you actually feel things." I should have seen the warning signs. Like the way I'd get a little too excited when I saw Jason's name pop up on my phone. Or how I'd check my reflection before family gatherings, making sure I looked my best, not for my husband, but for his brother. I told myself it was innocent, that I was just enjoying the attention, that there was nothing wrong with being close to my brother-in-law. But the shift was undeniable. Daniel noticed, too. It started with small things. He'd glance at my phone when Jason texted. His jaw would tighten whenever I laughed a little too hard at Jason's jokes. Once, at a dinner party, Jason complimented my dress, saying, "You always had the best style, Em." Daniel barely reacted, but later that night, as we got ready for bed, he asked, "Do you think Jason flirts with you?" I scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, he's just friendly." Daniel didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. But that moment stayed with me. The tension grew thicker. Daniel became more withdrawn, working even later, barely speaking when he was home. And I justified it. If he was going to be distant, why shouldn't I enjoy the company of someone who actually made me feel wanted? Then came the night that changed everything. Jason had invited me to an industry event, saying it would be a great networking opportunity for my studio. Strictly business, he promised, and I believed him. I dressed up, maybe a little more than I should have. When I arrived, Jason's eyes lingered just a second too long before he smirked. Damn, Em. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were trying to impress me. I laughed it off, but deep down I knew. We spent the night talking, drinking, lost in a bubble of easy conversation. It wasn't until much later, when we were standing alone on the balcony, that he said something that sent a jolt through me. You know, if things had gone differently, it could have been us. My breath caught. I should have shut it down. I should have walked away. But instead, I let the words settle between us, the unspoken tension that had been growing for months finally making itself known. I went home that night to a sleeping Daniel. As I crawled into bed beside him, guilt gnawed at me, but there was something else too. A thrill, a possibility. Because for the first time, I let myself wonder, did I marry the wrong brother? After that night, everything changed. I told myself it was nothing, that Jason's words were just a flirty slip, meaningless. But deep down, I knew better. The way he looked at me, the way my heart raced whenever he was near, this wasn't innocent anymore. I tried to ignore it, but the more I did, the worse it got. Daniel was gone for another work trip, and I was alone again. Jason texted late that night. Jason, couldn't sleep, you up? I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. I knew I should ignore it, but I didn't. Me, yeah, just watching TV. His reply came instantly. Jason, wish I was there. We always have the best conversations. I bit my lip. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. And what scared me most, I liked it. The next morning, I found myself dressing up for work, choosing an outfit I knew Jason had once complimented. My makeup was a little more polished, my perfume a little stronger. I told myself it was for me, but I knew the truth. That afternoon, Jason showed up at my studio, a coffee in hand. Figured you could use a pick-me-up, he said with that charming smile. I took the cup, our fingers brushing for just a second too long. It sent a shiver down my spine. We sat on the studio couch, talking like we always did. But there was something different this time, an electricity in the air, thick and undeniable. At one point, Jason leaned back, watching me. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if we had met first? My breath hitched. Jason, we can't. I know, he interrupted, but that doesn't mean I don't think about it. I should have stopped him, should have walked away. But instead, I let the silence stretch between us, my mind racing with the possibilities. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late, and I was closing up the studio. Jason had stuck around, helping me move some equipment. As I turned to thank him, he stepped closer, too close. You have no idea what you do to me, Em, he murmured. My heart pounded. I should have moved. I should have told him to leave. But I didn't. Instead, I felt myself leaning in, my body betraying every rational thought in my head. His hand brushed my arm, sending a trail of heat through my skin. His breath was warm against my cheek, and for a second I swore time stopped. Then my phone rang. I jumped back, breathless, scrambling for my bag. It was Daniel. Reality slammed into me like a truck. Jason stepped away, running a hand through his hair, eyes full of something I didn't want to name. I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice shaking. Hey, babe. Daniel's voice was calm, steady, the opposite of the storm raging inside me. Hey, just landed. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Me too. But it was a lie, because at that moment I wasn't thinking about my husband. I was thinking about Jason. And that was the moment I knew. I had already crossed a line. I told myself it was just a moment of weakness, that nothing actually happened, that I was still a faithful wife. But the guilt didn't fade. If anything, it made me reckless. The next day, Daniel came home from his trip, exhausted but happy to see me. He kissed my forehead, asked about my studio, and told me about his meetings. He was the same Daniel he had always been, steady, reliable. And I hated myself for resenting it. That weekend, we had dinner at Daniel's parents' house. Jason was there, of course. He was quieter than usual, barely looking at me, but I could feel the tension in every glance he stole when he thought no one was watching. Daniel noticed. At one point, he leaned close and whispered, "You okay? You seem distracted." I forced a smile, just tired. But Jason wasn't tired. He was fidgety, almost restless, and I could feel the energy crackling between us. It was suffocating. And then, I made the biggest mistake of all. It started as a joke. Daniel's mom was reminiscing about old times, about how Jason had always been the rebellious one, and Daniel the responsible one. "Jason's always been the fun one," she laughed. "Emily, I bet you never have a dull moment when he's around." I smirked, sipping my wine. Maybe I married the wrong brother then. Silence. The air was sucked out of the room in an instant. I hadn't even realized I said it out loud. I heard a fork clatter against a plate. Daniel's entire body went still. Jason's face paled. His mother cleared her throat, trying to break the unbearable silence. "Well, I'm sure she didn't mean it like that," she said awkwardly, forcing a laugh. But Daniel didn't laugh. He set his napkin down and stood up. "Excuse me." And just like that, he left the table. I sat frozen, heart pounding. Jason finally looked at me, but this time there was no teasing in his eyes, just regret. "You went too far, Em," he whispered. "Way too far." And then he left too. I wanted to chase after Daniel, to fix it, to take it back. But deep down, I knew I had just destroyed my marriage. The aftermath. When we got home, Daniel didn't say a word. He walked straight into our bedroom, grabbed his overnight bag, and started packing. "Daniel, please," I choked out, my voice trembling. He didn't look at me. "I just need space," he said. "I'll be at a hotel." I grabbed his arm, desperate. It was a joke. He finally met my gaze, and the hurt in his eyes nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. "No, Emily, it was." And with that, he walked out the door. I waited for him to come back. One night turned into 2, then 3. I called Jason, needing comfort, but he didn't answer. The next day, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Jason, I can't do this anymore. Fix your marriage or don't, but leave me out of it." He blocked me. That was when the panic set in. I had thought Jason wanted me too, that he had been waiting for me to finally choose him. But I had been wrong. I wasn't his soulmate. I was his brother's wife, and that had been nothing more than a game to him. I felt sick. And then Daniel came back. Not to talk. Not to fight. But with an envelope in his hand. He placed it on the kitchen counter and slid it toward me. Divorce papers. I stared at them, my hands shaking. "Daniel, please, we can fix this." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Emily, do you even love me anymore? Or did you ever?" Tears blurred my vision. "Of course I do." "Then why?" he said, voice breaking. "Did you spend our whole marriage wishing I was someone else?" I had no answer. Because deep down, I knew he was right. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost Daniel. I had lost everything. I didn't sign the divorce papers right away. For days, they sat untouched on the kitchen counter, a silent reminder of everything I had ruined. Daniel had moved out. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He simply packed his things and left. That hurt more than anything, the quietness of it. The realization that I had broken something so deeply that he didn't even want to fight for it. I called him. He didn't pick up. I showed up at his office. His assistant politely told me he was in a meeting. But I knew. Daniel was done with me. And Jason, he disappeared too. I tried reaching out, but my calls went straight to voicemail. My texts remained unread. He had cut me off completely. Then I saw it. A picture on social media. Jason, his arm wrapped around a woman, smiling, happy. He had moved on. Just like that. And I was alone. Losing everything. At first, I told myself I'd be fine. I still had my business, my independence, my life. But cracks began to show. The studio was struggling. Without Daniel's financial guidance, I had made reckless decisions. Expensive renovations, overpriced marketing, investments I couldn't afford. Now the bills were piling up. Clients were canceling. The dream I had poured everything into was crumbling, and there was no one left to help me pick up the pieces. I tried to hold on. But 2 months later, I closed the doors for good. I lost the studio. I lost the house. And just like that, I had nothing. I moved into a small apartment, barely able to afford rent. My friends, many of whom were Daniel's friends, too, started pulling away. The invitations stopped. The messages faded. Even my best friend, Sarah, grew distant. "You need to own up to this, Emily," she said one night over drinks. "You made this mess. You can't blame Jason or Daniel. This is on you." Her words stung. Because I knew she was right. The final blow. One evening, I ran into Daniel. At the grocery store, of all places. He was standing in the produce aisle, laughing at something, his hand resting on a woman's waist. She turned, and my stomach dropped. I knew her. Samantha, one of my former clients, a physical therapist, smart, driven, everything I had once pretended to be. And Daniel. He looked happy. Really happy. The kind of happy he had never been with me. He saw me, our eyes met. For a brief second, I thought maybe he'd say something, that maybe there was still a piece of him that missed me. But instead, he gave me a small nod, polite, detached. Like I was just another stranger in the store. And then he walked away, hand in hand with her. I stood frozen in that aisle, gripping my shopping cart, fighting back tears. Because in that moment, I knew Daniel had moved on. And I had lost him forever. Looking back, it's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. Jason is married now. I saw the pictures online. His wedding in Chicago, his perfect wife in her designer dress, smiling up at him like he was her whole world. That used to be me. But I was never his world. Not really. And Daniel, he's still with Samantha. I heard through mutual friends that they're serious. That she's everything I wasn't. Loyal, stable, someone he can actually build a future with. And me. I'm still here. Living in a tiny apartment, teaching yoga classes at the local YMCA. And every single day, I wake up with the same thought. I did this to myself. 6 months ago, I would have told you that none of this was my fault. I would have blamed Daniel for being too distant, too logical. I would have blamed Jason for leading me on, for making me feel like there was something more between us. I would have blamed everyone except the one person truly responsible. It was me. It's taken me a long time to admit that. For weeks after the divorce, I wallowed in self-pity. I stayed up late scrolling through Jason's wedding photos, staring at pictures of Daniel with Samantha, feeling sorry for myself. But the truth is, I had everything. A loving husband, a stable life, a career that could have flourished if I had just been patient. And I threw it all away. I thought I wanted excitement, passion, that rush of being desired. But what I really needed was stability, commitment, someone who would stand by me, even when things got hard. And Daniel, he was that person. I just never saw it. Trying to move on. Melissa, the only friend who stuck around, told me I should see a therapist. "You need to work on yourself, Emily," she said, "before you can ever have a real relationship again." At first, I rolled my eyes. I didn't need therapy, I just needed time. But the more I sat alone in my tiny apartment, the more I realized she was right. So I booked an appointment. And for the first time, I started unpacking everything. My insecurities, my need for validation, my fear of being ordinary. I realized that my obsession with Jason wasn't love. It was escape. He was never the right man for me. He was just a distraction from the fact that I wasn't happy with myself. And that's the real reason I lost Daniel. Not because he was too distant. Not because Jason was too tempting. But because I was too lost to appreciate what I had. The last goodbye. A few weeks ago, I ran into Daniel again. At a coffee shop this time. Samantha was with him, but she had stepped outside to take a call. For the first time in months, it was just the two of us. "Hey," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "Hey," he replied. I hesitated, then finally asked, "Are you happy?" He didn't answer right away. He just studied me for a moment, like he was trying to decide if he should tell me the truth. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I am." His words stung, but deep down, I knew I needed to hear them. "Good," I said, forcing a small smile. And I meant it. Because for the first time, I wasn't hoping he would take me back. I wasn't hoping for anything. I was just letting go. What I've learned. Looking back, I don't regret losing Jason. I regret losing Daniel. I regret not fighting harder for my marriage, not being the wife he deserved. But regret won't change anything. All I can do now is move forward. So I'm working on myself, trying to rebuild my life, one small step at a time. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. If I ever get another chance at love, I won't make the same mistake again. Because sometimes, the person you think is the wrong brother was the right man all along. What would you have done in Emily's situation? Do you think she truly deserved to lose everything, or was there still a chance to fix her marriage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love shocking stories like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, the next story is even more unbelievable. You won't want to miss it.